Okay, colleagues, good afternoon. So I think it's just gone 2 p.m. In UK time. So I think we'll begin our event today. So welcome to the second of our World Access to Higher Education Network Global Community webinars, supporting low-income, first-generation and marginalised students to achieve their potential, best practice from across the world, launching our WAHEN Global Community on supporting higher education, access and success, how universities do this. My name is Graham Atherton and I'm Director of the World Access to Higher Education Network. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the network and what we are doing and what we're going forward in a few moments. But today we've got some really excellent speakers sharing details of their work and presenting us with innovative examples where we support equitable access and success in higher education, drawn from South America, Africa, Europe, and North America. So truly global representation. Hopefully we'll have an excellent session this afternoon. In a few minutes, we'll turn to our first speakers. I do encourage you, as the session is going on, to think of your questions. There are opportunities for Q&A after our first two speakers, and also questions and answers after our second two speakers. So do please think of your comments and questions you can post in the chat. We can have hopefully some discussion and debate, as well as hearing from our presenters through the day. Before we begin now and get into our actual presenters themselves, we're going to have a little bit of background to the World Access to Education Network. So if you just change the next slide then, Francis, please. So, this is a little picture of our website. So launched in December 2024, WAHEN is a new global network that aims to bring together those organisations, universities, foundations, non-governmental organisations, others across the world to share their practice, to collaborate, to develop new initiatives, and to take forward the goal of making higher education across the world accessible to all of those who have the ability and potential to enter. Next slide, please. It follows on, as some of you know, from World Access to Education Day, which ran from 2018 to 2022. We have a next iteration of World Access to Education Day will be later this year in October 2025. We have a board representing different stakeholders in the initiative, including the World Bank, UNESCO, and the Asia Europe Foundation. Next slide, please. So this slide lays out the 5 pillars of what WAHEN will do. Capacity building, so enabling those engaged in this work, both at the strategic, operational and practical level, to develop their skills, their knowledge, their abilities to affect change. Research and advocacy, producing new knowledge, bringing together existing data, sharing the knowledge base and making the case for equitable access and success to higher education, to institutions, governments and others. World Access to Education Day, the International Day of Action, focused on addressing inequalities in access and success in higher education, bringing together those from across the world, opportunities to deliver events in your own particular university and region. We'll come on to that in a moment, really important there. The WAHEN model is not just a conference, it's the chance to affect things in your own area under the WAHEN banner. Convening, bringing key parties together to exchange and collaborate and share knowledge. And collaboration, open opportunity for new partnerships between members and others inside and outside WAHEN. Next slide, please. This is the second of our WAHEN Global Communities. The idea is that over the course of this year, we will have 4 seminars launching our first 4 initial communities. And as we move into 2026, we will develop these as regular online forums and meetings, bringing together particular professionals and also across organisations to share knowledge, practice, research, and develop collaboration. The idea is these will be spaces where we can focus on particular issues in the area of equitable access and success in higher education. So the first community be focusing on research and data, which we launched late last month. And now we have our second community being launched today, focusing on innovative practice with regard to supporting access and success. For next year, organisations will be able to join WAHEN and be part of our community, shaping our work we take forward. So after WAHEN, we'll be opening up opportunity for organisations to join, develop this truly global network. And again, it's key that we take WAHEN forward across higher education. There's a lot of concern regarding inequalities in access and success, and relating to sustainable development goals and other goals. Yet there is not, as yet, a network which truly brings those together across the world to affect change, as we believe that WAHEN can do. So, on to our first speaker. Now, it gives great pleasure to welcome Professor Alicia Salomone, Director of International Relations at the University of Chile. Alicia, I know, does fantastic work in the University of Chile. We'd love to hear about the model that's going forward in Chile, taking forward some of this work. So, Alicia, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning here in Chile, good afternoon in the UK. First of all, I want to say thank you to Green for this invitation and to take part in this very insightful conversation. I don't know if maybe Francis can share my presentation, or should I do it by myself?
Francis, will you be sharing the slides? I think you can share your own slides.
Alicia. Yes.
You can share your own slides, apparently.
Directly. Okay, yeah. Give me a sec. Is it okay? Oh, give me a second. Sharing, right?
Yes, it's showing up. Yes.
Okay, brilliant. So the title of this presentation is Equity and Inclusion Policies and Practices at the University of Chile, Admission, Academic Support, and Further Opportunities for a More Diverse Student Community. I want to acknowledge at the very beginning Carlos Rilling, who is a colleague, he's Executive Director of the Rector's Office. And he did a very insightful thesis on which I'm basing this presentation. To start with my presentation, I would like to say a few words about the context. The University of Chile was founded in 1842, is the oldest higher education institution in the country, and it has played a paramount role in the making of the state and the nation. This is very special in the case of this university. At present, it is a leading university, ranking #1 in research by ARWU. Until the beginning of the 2000s, the University of Chile, along with the Catholic University of Chile, the two very best universities in the country, would recruit the best students. However, the admission system based on a standardized test that awarded a single score to each student independently of their background tended to reproduce the high inequalities of the country's social structure. However, for the past 15 years, in the frame of the deepening of the transition to democracy inaugurated in the 1990s, many efforts were made by the state and the universities to incorporate equity and inclusion policies that have benefited low-income, first-generation, and marginalized students, compensating for those social inequalities. So this is the question I would like to pose today. What are the main equity and inclusion policies implemented at University of Chile? And if possible, some of their results over the past 15 years. I could like to introduce the national context because, as is mentioned there, the equity and inclusion policies in higher education has changed the landscape. Just to mention a few initiatives that modify this the higher education system, allowing for the incorporation of students coming from underprivileged social backgrounds, I would like to point out to some of the main initiatives. In 2006, a bonus in school grades, which are part of the general score to apply for a place at universities, this bonus was granted for students belonging to the top 10, to the top 15% of the course. This is at the University of Santiago de Chile, another state university in the city. But at a general level, it was taken as a national policy in the same year, granting supernumerary quotas for students belonging to the top 7 of their courses through a specific scholarship called Academic Excellence Scholarship. In 2013, something was added to the previous measures. It was the incorporation of grade rankings in the general scores to apply for a place. And this is very important because some students coming from municipal schools or schools that belong to communities or to provinces, maybe they cannot get the very best marks in the test, but they are the best students in their communities. So this is very important, the incorporation of this ranking of grades at the local level. In 2015, the Ministry of Education created a very important program. It is called PACE, PASE in Spanish, and it provides academic and psychoeducational support to meritorious students coming from municipal schools to access higher education, granting a place at certain universities that are engaged or involved in this program. And this is very important because students receive this support throughout 2 years, the last 2 years of higher education. So they compensate their backgrounds or the lacks of knowledge they can get at their schools with these special programs. And this PASE program is focused on the 25% of best students in local communities. In 2016, something very important happened during the presidency of Michelle Bachelet. She created the free tuition for low-income students, which at present represent more or less 50 to 60% of the total. In the case of University of Chile, 60% of our students receive this special scholarship from the state. And the last one I would like to mention is that in 2023, the state launched a new entrance exam to access higher education, which focuses on students' competencies and academic potential more than subject content knowledge. And something else, students may sit for this test twice a year, and they can apply for universities using the best grades. These are some of the main measures taken at the national level. Now let's have a look, or let's zoom in on the University of Chile. What about our students? We have a total, more or less, of 47,000 students, of which 37,000 belongs to the undergrad level and 10,000 to the postgraduate level. I mentioned postgraduate level because these students also, we are developing some inclusion and equity policies and actions at this level. But today, I'm focusing especially on undergrad. How many courses do we have? At the undergrad level, we have 72 courses. At the postgraduate level, 255, encompassing 124 master's programs, 22 training, professional training programs, especially in medicine and dentistry, and we have 43 PhD programs. Okay, this is a very important document to us. This is our educational model. It was launched in 2010 and was, reformulated in 2018 and 21, incorporating new dimensions. And this is an important document because our equity and inclusion policies are based on the ideas presented there. What are the main, the core principles of this document? Firstly, quality in teaching and learning, comprehensive education, pertinence and relevance of knowledge, equity and inclusion, and gender equity and non-discrimination. Okay, and what happened at the University of Chile? How did the institution adapt to the changing landscape in the country? And what are the main equity and inclusion policies implemented at our university? I would like to say that everything started in 2010 when the university started to take action to diversify its student population. From 2014 to the present, many policies and actions were developed and implemented, focusing on 3 target groups of students: low income, indigenous students, students with disability, and the relationship between female and male, that is to say, on gender imbalance, especially in STEM disciplines. And in this path, I would like to point to 3 moments or stages. Firstly, special admission programs, which allowed us to diversify our student population, but that is not enough. And we had to move forward towards initiatives to support students' academic trajectories. And now we are trying to expand opportunities for this diverse student community. Very briefly, I'm going to mention some of the initiatives. There are much more of what I can present here, but at least for you to have a general idea of what we are doing, I will present. Chile, I would like to mention 4 out of 10 maybe, or 15. Firstly, the priority educational equity admission system that is focused on students coming from municipal schools belonging to the first 6 income deciles, prioritizing those who graduated from high school in the year before to admission, prior to admission. It is implemented at every level within the university. It encompasses 45 out of 72 courses in all faculties. What happened between 2010 and 2024? We could incorporate 3,728 students in total belonging to this special program, and including also a special program for social sciences equity quota. Another program, gender equity admission system, is focused on female and male students in program with a high gender skewed composition. The target courses are 7 courses in 4 faculties with vacancies based on gender imbalance. And this program has benefited 864 students in total. The admission system for indigenous students, they have to belong to legally recognized Chilean indigenous peoples, and is currently implemented at 58 courses in all the faculties. It has benefited 385 students in total through these 2 different programs. And finally, the admission system for students with disability, again, it benefits students with legally recognized physical, visual, or auditory disabilities, is implemented at 59 courses in all faculties and has benefited 62 students in total. But as mentioned before, admission is not enough. What is beyond admission? That means how can we retain these students that have been admitted through special programs. So the special program admission programs have been critical in increasing the student diversity at the University of Chile. However, they do not guarantee that students will not drop out. So student retention demands a transformation in the whole university experience, making it possible for students to deal with social, emotional, material, and academic issues, achieving their goals. For the university, retaining students implies a commitment to grant proper pedagogical, psychosocial, cultural, and material support for them to complete their academic trajectories successfully. What are some of
Alicia, you have 2 more minutes, please.
Oh, okay. Some of the initiatives: academic mentoring in first year, flexibility in curricular progression, psychosocial support, monitoring of students' well-being, and peer support. Finally, we noticed that some of the situations that affect more underrepresented students are the opportunities to internationalize their careers and labor prospects. And this is why during the past months, we've been focusing on providing opportunities for these special admission system students to increase their international exposure through programs focused on a diverse or a range of opportunities for virtual and in-person or on-campus mobility. Just to finish with that, these ideas, for the past 15 years, the university has implemented equity and inclusion policies that align with the national orientations and sometimes go beyond them. Admissions were critical to move Universidad de Chile from an elite university in terms of student population to a more inclusive and diverse institution. However, a more inclusive and equitable admission is not enough. Further policies and actions are required to support students in their academic trajectories and university experiences as a whole. Within this, internationalization of formation has proved to play a key role in providing underrepresented students with opportunities to improve their prospects and academic careers, and this is why we are also working on that. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Alicia. Fantastic presentation there. It's showing the importance of long-term commitment through multiple avenues in terms of a university really committing strategically to equitable access and success. I look forward also to some discussion later on, and please, if you have questions for Alicia, please share them in the chat when we open up our questions after our next presenters. So straight on to our next presenters now. Wonderful to welcome now Professor June Pym, Emeritus Associate Professor, Education Consultant, and Malele, Student Development Advisor at the Saville Foundation. So Mo and June, great to see you as ever. Over to you.
Morning. Morning. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much. I really appreciate this invite and people attending at very different hours. So Mo Malele, she was my student in the EDU, and we're now friends and colleagues for the Saville Foundation. We're going to be splitting the presentation, and particularly we're wanting to focus on whose voice matters in terms of the support, the success. So there's always the traditional and the quantifiable things of when we're looking particularly in South Africa, most are marginalized students, and it's classes coming in, but it's been very racially profiled, given the years of exclusion in the history in this country. But success has always been very strongly focused on throughput and attrition rates, and then more lately, professional qualifications. And those things are really, really important. And we do take them seriously. But I think the other thing that we're really working and measuring and setting up structures for, apart from that, is a variety of basically moments and possibilities for students to become more critical thinkers, to ask critical questions, to problem solve, to feel failure as an opportunity, engage with others, negotiate conflict, reflect, basically really about what does it mean to actually leave the institution with a future, not just with a degree. So there's been and obviously with that, it's a very strong thing on social citizenship, leadership in this country. So we really are building in, not just about the success about getting through the degree and getting through professional qualifications, because I was the director at UCT, University of Cape Town, in commerce. So they're very professional degrees. People are mainly doing CA and actuarial science. So those things matter, but it also matters about who is the topology of the graduate. And I thought it would be quite useful just in this conversation, because of South Africa's history. There's been pretty much 45 years of experience in looking and dealing with and working with equity and success. And I thought it's quite useful just to do a very quick pen sketch of those models. So the first model started in the 80s, and it was very strongly focused on academic literacies, different academic literacies in the first year. And was it successful? No, it wasn't. Very, very high attrition rate after first year. And actually, there was nothing embedded in the disciplines. All the literacies were actually separate. So that was the first model. The second model shifted sort of mid 80s to the late 80s. And it was the language was different. The first model was called academic support. The second one was called academic development. And there was a strong focus on saying we need to work with the whole student. It's not just about the academics. So there was various kinds of support of programs that would deal with the whole student. However, no student sits in a program, and most of those programs were separate programs in the university or in bursary financial programs. So was the success limited? Limited in terms of numbers, and limited also in terms of, even if those students in a program had particular kind of amazing teachers in first year, they would have to be in mainstream. We call it mainstream, where, you in the system. So I particularly want to talk about the third model, which is really, we had basically it's been 25 years to make mistakes, to learn, to change in the Educational Development Unit in Commerce at UCT. But this was very, very strong focus of shifting away from those first two models, which were in some ways a self-fulfilling prophecy of living out a lot of students feeling like they do not fit in. They felt othered, they felt an imposter syndrome. So a very strong deficit model. So that program separateness actually ended up being really quite counterintuitive to the work. So the EDU model, I think, took that very seriously in terms of having to work. And I'm really interested about Alicia talking about Chilean University now, about the whole university, because I think that's been our very strong focus, is working systemically. And therefore, there's multiple voices, having to work with multiple voices to work systemically, because actually it's in that we can actually really start talking about supporting and real success in terms of what we understand by it. So, you know, with those voices and with that work and with the foci, obviously the students, and we've got multiple ways of accessing, not just accessing students' voice, but also experiences of student voice, and Mo will be speaking to that, but also about the alumni. I mean, it's interesting that Mo sitting here as an alumni, but we're really shifting that notion of, you know, well, I don't know overseas, but in South Africa, alumni is very strongly seen as a kind of funding stream, and we're really using that in the program, in the faculty, in the work with students to mentor, to monitor, to basically be a role model, and a link between work and university and so on. So there's a whole area there with both past and present students. I think the work with the lecturers, and whether that's tutors and that, is like absolutely critical. We have actually found that particularly in South Africa, most people are actually academic experts. They are mathematicians or statisticians. They have not had training in teaching. And so the whole thing about how do you have inclusion of voice in terms of your pedagogy? What are the assumptions about your context? What kind of things are we using around assessment? How do we involve and support, you know, a very different mindset about who we're teaching, why we're teaching, and what we're teaching? So there's a lot of work just in the academic space about really thinking very differently about teaching, because the teachers are teaching, you know, there is not a separate little group. People are teaching and people are exposed to that. So it really needs a very different consciousness, and particularly in South Africa, also about language and context. I think the other thing that we are consciously working on in our work, because at the moment we're not just working with UCT, but we're working with universities across the country, and also a little bit with Berkeley, which has actually arisen out of WAHEN, which is a beautiful partnership. But I think there's a sense that certainly here that if you are very good in research or you're a good teacher, you eventually will become promoted. But there is no support in terms of how do you support and nurture and respect leaders so that they can be really understand systems, act with integrity, have heart, but feel that there's a support, because it's about modeling it. It's about supporting the people who are actually, and we find particularly sort of in fairly senior positions, but are quite young and have kind of been just thrown in the deep end. And then very definitely the institution, you know, what are the norms and the cultures, the language, the ways of being? And does everybody in that institution see equity, or is it the specialist's job? And I think we're really moving hard to say it's not about the specialist job. It's about what happens with the language, what happens with the admin help, what happens in terms of the library. Every element of the university is permeated by whose culture. And we're actually doing an interesting project at the moment with cultural capital, really trying to get from students to what extent is their capital, because they come with an enormous amount to the institution. And to what extent is it resonated? Is it recognized? Or is it just a question of assimilating and fitting into the university? The other piece of work is, and it's another voice, is really about the cross disciplines. So particularly, I think in South Africa, it's like we can't actually just again engage with economists without environmental scientists. So it's really about having those multiple voices, because it is around, you know, what kind of a society we're building, and it's not one in silos. It's having to have a critical engagement across disciplines and definitely across universities. So the collaboration, the partnership, rather than the silos, the sharing of resources, huge amount of difference that it's actually making. And then the last thing that I wanted to speak to is about power. And it's really about the initiatives that we do. It is taking very strategically, seriously, who's in power, and incorporating, rather than, you know, we're saying, oh, we're working with a converted. Actually, people hold power, and their influence, their inclusion is, we find, absolutely critical in terms of the involvement about equity and everything that's involved with that. So it's taken time. It takes time. It's very, very small baby steps, but it's interesting, I think, for the EDU Commerce, and that's why, you know, it's become really an important model for us, is that the pass rates literally have gone up 3 times, a massive, massive increase. In fact, it's probably 4 times in terms of professional outcomes, in terms particularly actuary and accounting. But more importantly, and that's really important, so many of our students, a lot of them are in the commerce world, some people are not, they're in the NGO world. Mo is an example of having done a commerce degree, but people have actually built all kinds of things with their old school, their communities, students of legacies. So there's a very strong thing in terms of what, you know, it's not just about walking out with your degree, but what is it? Who are we in this country? So, and I kind of thought this was a little strange, funny thing just to end with. Dalai Lama's quote, he says, if you think you're too small to make a difference, he said, try sleeping with a mosquito. I thought that was great. Thank you so much, and over to Mo.
What an interesting way to end. What an interesting quote, Jeannie. Good morning and well, particularly good afternoon from where I'm dialing in here in South Africa. It's in the afternoon. It's really great to be here. Thank you to WAHEN and Graham and the team for the invite. My name is Malele, and I'm the Student Development Advisor with the Saville Foundation. And I work primarily really just around wraparound support and holistic support and development of students in the higher education space, working and implementing and executing and facilitating various programs at different institutions within South Africa. And I really just wanted to build on what Julian has very wonderfully said. And I work particularly with students, so I'm going to be honing in particularly on the student voice. Really wanted to talk about students as active citizens of their teaching, learning, and development, and really just, you know, engage a little bit on that. And I am an advocate of a student-centric approach. I think that higher learning is actually the teaching, the learning, and the development of the student, with everything else being secondary to that particular element of core business. And that's why I'm a advocate, very, very passionate about the fact that student voice and student agency should actually be a central authority in that point. I think this idea of active citizens, right, is it's actually just like a trend topic right now in the rest of the world, just thinking globally about, you know, social apathy and so forth. And so a lot of a lot of people actually just socially, globally, more now than ever actually, is this topic of, you know, people need to be active citizens. And I think this is actually like, you know, the utopia, right? But active citizens don't just magically appear like manna falling from heaven. You know, active citizens in adulthood don't just appear. I genuinely do believe that active citizens, we start cultivating and building, you know, that culture and that consciousness at a very young age. And particularly, I think that institutions of higher learning have a particular responsibility in ensuring that students start their active citizenship with being active citizens of their teaching, learning, and development. And we as practitioners and policymakers need to be very strategic and intentional around how do we champion student voice. If we're going to actually talk about equity, access, and success, and, you know, advancing the success of low-income students and first-generation and marginalized students, we need to be more strategic and intentional around how we champion student voice, how do we champion student agency, and how do we create a space where students become active citizens of their educational journey. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about how we actually champion this across institutions in South Africa. And we run the Sonke program at the University of Cape Town. We also run the Tleha program at the Central University of Technology, and are expanding the program into other institutions of higher learning. But it's really around holistic student development and support. And there's a lot of other ways that we do this, but I really just wanted to share just very briefly a handful of ways that we bring this idea of active citizenry to life. The first thing is we are very wary of painting students with one brush, right? We do not subscribe to the ideology that students are just students, their narratives and their stories are the same, their needs and their desires and their ambitions are the same, their whys are the same. We don't actually subscribe to that ideology. We do not paint students with one brush. We believe and we do encourage that the lived experiences of students must be valued as part of a larger tapestry of experiences. And it's really just about the ideology that when the individual's lived experiences are connected to the larger group identity, that's actually, in my experience with the work that I've been doing over the last several years, that's really where students start to feel a sense of belonging to a community, to something bigger than them, and to a why that is bigger than them, right? And I think it's, as active citizens, the building of teaching and learning communities becomes quite central to this point. So that's really something that we champion. We talk a lot about is about the students' experience, their lived experiences being valued and being validated, as diverse as they may be. The next thing is we encourage and we challenge students, and really just everybody in our ecosystem, actually, not to look at things as right or wrong. It's always somewhere in the middle, not black or white. It's always somewhere actually in that gray area in the middle. And we encourage students to be curious, to question, to challenge, without bias, prejudice, or repercussion, which is very important because often the higher education system can, in almost a militant type, chain of command, hierarchy, top down, lecturer, student, and just a gulf of a gap between the two. So we actually encourage students to be curious. We encourage them to question. We encourage them to challenge. We encourage them and empower them to actually have a difference of opinion and to voice that opinion. The other thing that we're also very conscious of is creating safe spaces for vulnerability. We linked to the first 2 points that I've made, particularly around lived experiences, we encourage students to lean into their vulnerability and to lean into their humanity. And not only do we just encourage that, but we co-create these safe spaces for students. And I use that word co-create very intentionally, because it's not about us as practitioners and policymakers creating this utopian space and utopian ideology and then inviting students and then telling them to be vulnerable or telling them that it's going to work. It's really about us walking with students and journeying with them, creating these safe spaces with them in a manner in which that they actually own the space. They actually have created it with us. This is their space, actually, right? And we actually practice in the sense of group-based vulnerability, where students are able to share their stories with each other in a safe space. And that's where, the peer-to-peer learning, the peer-to-peer support, the building of teaching and learning communities and bringing that to life really actually happens. So we create those spaces with students where there's group-based vulnerability, where students are encouraged to talk about their lived experiences in an open setting. And then we also create those spaces in a one-to-one space. And I keep coming back to this thing just about where the individual identity and experience has that sweet spot of the Venn diagram with the group identity, and the one doesn't overshadow the other or get lost in the other, is really where you have the sweet spot of students feeling a sense of community, is students really feeling like they're active citizens of their teaching, learning, and development. And then the last one, which is very important, is around aligning the rules with the strategic intent or the strategic goal of equity, excellence, and success. And this really is just, I think June mentioned this, but this really is the point that equity, access, and success, if this is a strategic goal, a strategic intent, it becomes everybody's job. It's everybody's job. From the PhD lecturers right down to the guys that clean the lecture theaters and drive the buses and the university shuttles, right? It's everybody's job. From the lecturers and the teaching assistants and the academic admin staff right through to the procurement office and the marketing department. If this is a strategic intent, then it's everybody's job. Everybody has a role to play in bringing this ideology or rather, let me say, bringing the strategic intent to life. And what I've seen in the years that I've been, working within the Saville Foundation and within different institutions that function very differently, and the nuances definitely do exist. But what I've seen is that the space where all of just meet is really where you actually get to a point where students are now practicing active citizenry, passive participants of their teaching, of their learning, of their development, but they are active in it. And so I would just like to conclude with that point that where we value the students' lived experiences, as diverse as they are, even with the complication of wanting to reach scale, which is always an additional layer to this point. But we need to have scale whilst respecting and valuing and validating the lived experiences of students, as diverse as they may be. There's no right or wrong. It's somewhere in the middle. It's not black or white. It's somewhere in the middle. We need to encourage young people to be curious, to question, to challenge without bias or prejudice or repercussion or judgment. We need to encourage them to lean into their vulnerability and into their humanity. And also we need to align everybody's role and ensure that everybody across departments and in the institution, that everybody is working towards the strategic intent of equity, access, and success. And where those four things meet, sprinkled with a couple of others, is really where you get students as active citizens of their teaching, learning, and development. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mo, and thank you, June, for that excellent presentation, reflecting upon the need for engagement across the whole institution, as well as June was speaking about some of the challenges in terms of how we understand this area in the South African context. So now it's time for discussion and questions. So if you do have questions, either pose them into the chat or into the Q&A there. We only have one question so far for our participants. It's just with regards to older students. I mean, I guess to an extent, would you see the focus in your work thus far has been on students in the 18 to 24 age group, or if not, it hasn't been? In terms of a lifelong learning based perspective, what's the key role within equitable access and success work in your respective contexts for engaging students across the life course? Maybe Alicia, you could go first.
Thank you very much. Well, I was very much inspired by my colleagues' presentations, and I want to pick up an idea, this of collecting voices and listening to voices and taking them into consideration. I think this is something very important, and we want to take this on board. This is part of our, daily experience. We want to listen to them because this is key. We cannot produce policies and practices without the people that are, our students, no? And I don't know, maybe I got a bit distracted and I very much focused on my answer, but I think that this is something critical.
The question was really on older students, Alicia. What's the perspective on engaging older students?
Well, again, I think I was not that distant from my answer. I think that, again, incorporating them within our policies, within our perspectives. At this moment, we are developing, we're incorporating them to the government at the different faculties and at the central level. They will be represented at the faculty councils and that. And I think that is very important. That is why I connected immediately with what Mo have said about paying attention what they have to say, because we totally agree in that point. We need to make them responsible for their own learning and allowing them to become active citizens of their learning, and also as part of the country of citizenship in a broader level, as national citizens and also global citizens. So I think that is I feel very close to what my colleagues said.
Sure, sure. Thank you. Thank you. So, June and Mo, what's your perspective on the engagement of older students?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think our work's very strongly was always in undergraduate, and it shifted way beyond the first year, so it's a whole degree. But I think the shift has been very strongly now to postgrad, because I think people are really, really, it's almost like, okay, it's a done deal, and it's actually not a done deal. It's really different challenges to deal with postgrad. So that's where we're using this new alumni program that we're launching now, quite particularly, both in terms of academic and in terms of mentoring and in terms of role modeling. But I think the age group, like it tends to be, except for the, these online universities, which are very few, it's unis are basic. Mostly students in South Africa it'd be an odd anomaly, but people would be like under 25. I mean, you'd get older students who in a PhD course and stuff, but we are focusing particularly on the professional postgraduate things, because there's massive pressure, and it's always around funding, about getting through, then do the professional exams. So, it's like life or death for students. So the pressure is particularly bad. Particularly, we find in commerce, what's really been a pressure is that students don't necessarily want to go and be an accountant or an actuary, but they are under economic pressure from their families, their communities. So it's quite dire. It's like you're seen as the person who's going to be the person who's going to bring in the money. So there's a enormous amount of support needed on every scale, actually, because the stakes are high. Yeah, but it's not adult students on the whole. I mean, not adult students. We don't generally have, other than master's, PhD students. Yeah.
Okay. Mo, do you want to add on the older students point?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in my work, like Julian said, a lot of my work is really focused on undergrad, and we are starting to expand into postgrad. But I think it's like the only thing I would say is that it's really about understanding. It once again comes to just listening and understanding those needs and seeing how you can implement that. I mean, obviously with all the students, you're talking about people that probably would have kids, people that probably would have jobs, probably self-funding or are part-time working and self-funding themselves. So they come with another layer of differences and complications, right? So is it that the institution has daycare services and kids and their academics, so it like I mean, I do actually recall studying with students. I won't mention names, but I do recall having students in my classes that were a bit older and had kids quite young, and would sometimes rock up on campus with the kid and so forth. And I'd be like, why is the little human here? And it turns out that the kid was at daycare nearby or on the on-campus daycare. So, I mean, that's a random example, but those are the kinds of things that institutions, if that's the play, like once again, I come back to strategic intent. If that's the play that we're making as an institution, and we're saying that we want to be there for our elderly students, and we want to, still maintain the ideology of equity, access, and success with an elderly generation, then that's the kind of stuff that you would need to make, right? Daycare services, night classes, flexible learning, and that kind of stuff. So that's what I've got to add to that.
Thank you. So, okay, well, I have one question for me then before we move on to the next presenters. So, how do you deal with resistance to this agenda in your respective institutions? Obviously, not everybody will support the work that you're taking going forward. So, how do you deal with those departments, individual colleagues, or others in leadership who don't instinctively sort of believe or buy into this agenda and see other priorities for the university? Alicia.
Okay, yes, of course, you will always find resistance to these innovative ideas, because some people may oppose excellency versus inclusion. Yeah, and this has nothing to do. Both things come together. And of course, we need to speak to people, to convince them. This is our daily work. Talking to people, trying to explain and to convince. Note, for instance, more or less 55 out of 72 courses at my university has incorporated inclusion and inclusive policies. It means the majority of our faculties accept this orientation. But of course, we need to work more and more with other people who still doesn't understand the importance of these policies. So I think this is the way, talking to people, explaining, and helping them understand that this is the best for all, and that's it. No other way possible.
Thank you, Alicia. June.
I think two things. I think the one is, I'm using this as an example. We started, it was 20 years ago, basically a forum. It was at lunchtime every 2 weeks, but it was really about people presenting different aspects of teaching so the teaching could become inclusive. And when it started, it was like, oh, there was like 4 people and a dog, like it was just seen as this kind of maverick left-wing sort of thing. But it's interesting, and I think that's an interesting example about using power, because then I would get an interesting, really provocative question, ask the heads of department or be in a panel or the dean, and gradually flipping over, that thing's still going 25 years later, and it's like the biggest forum in the faculty. It's like, well, eventually you just know any vibrant discussion is actually having that place. So that was one interesting example of just literally taking the time, but see who you include. And then the other thing, which I think we've been able to use to our advantage, it's what I would class as the political and the professional pressure, because people might not even like it. They don't care. They just really don't care. But the accountants care. What's their throughput rate in terms of equity? The country cares because it's been so exclusionary for decades, you know, in this horrific way. So people are accountable. So even if they don't like it, you use that as a leverage, because the context is definitely putting pressure, whether people believe it or they don't believe it, and they just. So I think those two leverages, there are lots of others, but those have been particularly powerful. Yeah.
Thank you. Well.
Yeah, I think for me it's two things. I 100% agree with what June is saying. I think it's also about tying the goals and the strategic intent to what people are actually doing day to day. People actually have to be able to marry the two in what they actually what their role is and what their work is, right? And I think sometimes when there's too much of a disconnect between the goal or the strategy and what I actually do and what my role is, people then get lost in that bridge in the middle. And that's why leaders need to step in and say that I'm going to help you marry the two. As a leader, you go and you say, procurement department, this is our strategic intent, equity, access, and success. Go as a team on an offsite, come back tomorrow and tell me what your role is in equity, access, and success, because that's our strategic goal, right? So we have to actually be able to marry the two, and this is where leadership becomes important. Leaders need to actually help their people marry the two. And I think where the two marry, that's actually where you sometimes actually really get some change.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, June. Thank you, Alicia. So it's a fantastic presentation. Thank you for your discussion, answering the questions. Thank you for the questions from the audience. If we were here in person, we'd thank you in a conventional way, but I'm sure people across the world are thanking you in their own ways, in individual rooms. So thank you both for taking part. Look forward to seeing you. I'm sure I will see you again at future WAHEN events and activities. And now we go on to our second part of today. So we have 2 more speakers. Again, wonderful reflections down what to overcome resistance. I think most points at the end were wonderful there about how we take leadership in these contexts across an institution. And obviously June and Alicia taking their own experiences as well. Our next speaker now is Martin Webster, an expert in this field, both in the UK and internationally. He is the leader of the National Education Opportunities Network, or NEON, in the United Kingdom. And Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Graham. Just starting my slideshow. Does that look all right to everyone? Hopefully you can see that. So yes, I'm Martin Webster from the National Education Opportunities Network. If I can get to my next slide, that would help, wouldn't it? So thank you for inviting me today. What I'm going to talk about is a little bit about NEON to give some context, and then some UK case studies of work that's going on here in the UK. And then I'll talk a little bit about the future challenges that the sector is facing. So just about NEOM. NEOM was founded in 2012, and it's slowly grown since then. We're a network of professionals concerned with equity in higher education throughout the student life cycle. We probably very much grew out of the outreach community with people who were working predominantly with schools, but also communities. But as people have realised that inequality doesn't disappear when students first come through the door of universities, we've taken a much more life cycle approach, looking at transition and student success. We've got over 130 members, the majority are universities, but we also have some partnerships, some further education colleges, and some third sector organisations who are also members. We're shaped and we're led by our members. We have a board of trustees who are elected by our members, and we support our members through professional development, research and advocacy, the sharing of practice, and offering input and support to policymakers and governments on behalf of its members. It's worth saying we hold the biggest conference dedicated to widening access in the UK. We had over 200 people join us in the northwest of England the other week. And we also have an annual awards ceremony. A lot of the examples that I've taken of the practice have been from NEOM Award winners over previous years. So the first example I've got for you of work that's going on in the UK is from the University of Derby. That should say D-E-R-B-Y. I apologise. And their aim is to support a wide range of learners from primary age right the way through to secondary school pupils in their attainment through multiple interventions. It's got to be said that funding in the UK or institutions in the UK tend to focus more on secondary school pupils than primary school pupils, but we do have a fair number of our members who work in primary schools as well. We know that the younger you start, the better. If you're going to change the attitudes of young people, you need to start at a young age. But government funding and sometimes institutional priorities have meant that probably the majority of universities tend to focus on slightly older learners. As far as targeting's done on a school basis. So the University of Derby look for schools in areas of low participation in higher education, where they're below the average. They have 6 high priority primary schools and 32 priority secondary schools, and they engage in their programme between 3,000 and 4,000 pupils each year. And these are the kind of activities that the university are doing. So you'll see, and I've put the pupil ages down the left-hand side there, that they'll start in primary schools with what they refer to explorer days. So they'll bring young people onto campus. They'll give them a campus treasure hunt to make it engagement. They might do some mini lectures on an engaging subject and then have a mini graduation ceremony at the end of the day. But they're also going out into the schools that they work with, offering reading and writing support by using sometimes staff through staff volunteering and sometimes existing students as well. When pupils are aged 11 or 12, they may come on a more advanced university visit day, which again tells them about, well, what is higher education? What does it mean to study a degree and get to meet some existing students? Age 12, 13, they'll have sessions in school about why go to university, what's the benefits. When they're 13 or 14, In school in the UK, they tend to pick options they want to follow at their first set of major exams, which is at age 16, called GCSEs. And a lot of the choices you make at that age actually dictate what you will do in the future. So, for example, if you want to do medicine or veterinary science, it's very important that you pick physics, chemistry, and biology, or at least what's referred to in the UK as double science. So there is a qualification called single science. If pupils pick that, they close off the door. So there's some really important decisions that are made at a very young age in school here, which can cut off future routes. So that's why that's important. Between the ages of 14 to 16, they may be offered mentoring as well from University of Derby undergraduate. And also the university run various residential summer schools on campus, and also sessions on campus about learning skills. So how should you learn? How should you revise? How do you write an essay? I'm just trying to move my slides on. What are the challenges as far as Derby are concerned? Well, in 23-24, 34 schools were offered activities. 18 schools participated in one activity. Only 10 participated in more than one activity. And from a university's point of view, they want to work with young people repeatedly because they know that's the way they can make an impact rather than having a one-off intervention. But the schools who tend to decide which pupils can come to the activities tend to spread it around different pupils. So that can be a challenge. So how do we encourage schools to allow pupils to take part in those regular activities rather than a one-off intervention? Also, it's quite hard to ascertain the impact of the overall programme as the activities are being evaluated in isolation. And as I said, you can't say that one young person will necessarily go through the whole programme and have every intervention. So there's not really enough evidence at the moment to see if the programme is impacting on attainment. There's been a bit of a shift in the pressure on universities to look at the attainment gap in schools and to make a difference, but that's only come over the last couple of years. And so I think we're at early stages in that. The second project I wanted to highlight is something called RAW, which I think is a great acronym, Raising Attainment with Resilience. And it's been delivered by Nottingham Trent University since 2018-19. It's based on three main ideas. So the first is resilience. How do you protect yourself from the negative effects of certain stressful situations? The second is test anxiety. We know from research that high test anxiety leads to poor performance. And if you're from a disadvantaged background, you are more likely to experience high test anxiety. So what can we do about that? And also it's based on this idea of a pupil participatory delivery model. They deliver it in 10 schools over a 6-week period, and it's delivered to 30 pupils per school, so 300 pupils in a year. And it's actually the participants who are supported to develop their own tools to support their own resilience. And they also have the advantage they're able then to practice that in the real world environment of school tests. What are the challenges? Getting the schools on board and being committed to the programme, it is quite hard, possibly because it has a lot of data requirements and there's data sharing agreements that have to be put in place. They've developed quite a strict onboarding process. So the school commit to baseline testing a whole year group, so at age 14. They then identify 2 cohorts, and one of those cohorts is used for randomized control trial. And 100% of both the cohorts identified must meet disadvantage criteria. The school have to send out data consent forms to parents. They have to identify delivery dates and delivery space, and they have to administer follow-up testing to both groups. So there's quite an onus on the school to do this. In terms of evidence of impact, they're continuing to build evidence. The gentleman who runs it is quite, I would say, nervous of trying to say, oh yes, this definitely increases attainment. He sort of always says to me, oh, we haven't got insufficient data at the moment. But the indications suggest that attainment for participants is improved. And this is a quote from a head teacher, which I think demonstrates the impact of it. First of all, you can see that this head teacher has worked with the programme on 3 separate occasions, but he talks about the impacts on a group of relatively disadvantaged, disengaged boys, and how the project made them more confident, and they were able to build some momentum towards their GCSE examinations. The last project I'd highlight is something called Future Writers. It's delivered by a regional partnership of universities in the northwest of England.
You got 2 minutes, Martin. Thank you.
Okay. They encourage young people to increase their attainment in English, and they work with 6 secondary schools with low attainment in comparison to the rest of their area. It's aimed at 13 to 15-year-olds, and it consists of 4 interventions. And that just gives you an idea. So there's a subject spotlight workshop in school that takes place with a whole year group, as does a talk about communication workshop in school, and academic workshop from university lecturers, which is live online and takes place in school. The pupils are then invited to take part in a writing competition, submit their entries, which are marked by academics, and then the finalists are invited to a subject taster day in English at the university and a prize presentation with an anthology of creative writing pieces being produced and shared with the participants. And you can see there some of the outcomes which show that the confidence in written English has come up. The ability they've got more confidence in being able to successfully achieve their GCSEs. 50% of learners showed improvements when they were asked to agree or disagree with the comment, I can confidently adapt my writing skill to suit the style of task I've been given. And 66% said they were going to go to university or take a career that currently would be accessed through higher education. So what are the future challenges here in the UK? I think evaluation remains a challenge. I mentioned with Nottingham Trent, they take part in randomised control trials, and that can be something that is slightly controversial amongst people who work within widening access and equity in the UK. The developing of effective partnerships with schools. Schools aren't measured on the number of pupils who transition through to higher education, to university. And so they're more pressed on exam results. So that's a pressure. And also universities in the UK at the moment are experiencing quite challenging financial circumstances, and trying to maintain the level of funding required, I think, for these types of activities remains a challenge. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Martin. Much to consider there in your examples, what's happening in the UK in terms of particularly evaluation of impact. An interesting point. Now, how do we know that these programs are really having the impact on the learners we wish them to have? So let's move on to our final panelist today. So Dr. Julian Ledesma, Fabrizio and Mejia from Berkeley, University of Berkeley in California. So Fabrizio and Julian, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. I think Julian is starting the slide deck. Well, good morning from good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at in the world. So just want to give you a couple quick facts about UC Berkeley. If you can go to the next slide, Julian. So Berkeley, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, recently named the top public university in the world. I believe fifth or sixth of all universities in a recent Forbes ranking. Some facts about Berkeley on the next slide, please. So there you see our total population is about 42,000, 33 of those are undergraduates. Eligibility-wise, that number is actually 11.8 this year, I believe. The cost you see there in American dollars are of our undergraduates, about 30% are first-generation college goers, 27% or so are low income, and 25% of those are underrepresented ethnic minorities. Next slide.
So I can jump
Hand it
in.
over to you.
Yeah, well, so good to be here and so good to hear the other panelists as well. And I think Fabrizio started us off with an overview of Berkeley and who we are and where we're situated. I think I should also share that Fabrizio and I are also alumni of UC Berkeley. So we attended UC Berkeley in the mid-90s. And so for us, really have invested our careers in trying to address many of the gaps that we experience as students or that we saw our communities and our fellow students experience. And today we're going to be talking about that particular approach, kind of what's our formula for trying to address that. It's been something we've tried to build on and create and really scale over the last few years in particular. So today when we talk about that approach, we're going to talk about not just the programs and the very specific things that are available to students and that we have implemented to address equity gaps, to make outcomes, increase the performance of students, to improve outcomes. We're going to talk about those things, but we're also going to talk about just kind of what are the concepts, what are the kind of theoretical grounding for much of what we do, and how is it equity centered, how is it equity based. We're going to talk about those things again for many of the programs that are in my individual portfolio, that are part of UC Berkeley, that are part of the Division of Equity and Inclusion. And those are going to include an array of programming and specialized services. These are things that target communities that are low income, first generation, historically underrepresented in U.S. Institutions of higher learning. But within that community, there's rich diversity as well. There's folks who have been part of the foster care system. There are students who have been veterans and served in the military. You're talking about student parents, undocumented students who don't have immigration status. Reentry students. Earlier, there was this question about older students, and we have programs specifically for those students. So our approach has been one to try to really address and leverage what those students bring, but also provide tailored and individualized support because students have different needs as well, particularly among such a diverse community. So you're going to hear about some of the holistic support we offer, that approach itself, and so some of the very specific things that are part of that support. What you're seeing on the screen now is an articulation of what that all means, all put together. So put together, there is a concept of empowering holistic counseling that we employ. This is really kind of the latest iteration of what comprehensive and holistic support means and how we deploy it. There's been multiple iterations. I think I met Graham when we were discussing one of the very early, probably the first iteration of this that was situated in one of our larger programs. And over time, we have grown and developed it as well. I'm going to want to start as well with a note on terminology because I think language is important. We talk and use terms advising, we use terms counseling, and it is important to make a distinction. Advising is a term that's traditionally been focused on the educational experience, the academic experience. And many times advising has been informational and sometimes even prescriptive in a traditional kind of historic sense. Counseling is a more inclusive term, and that's certainly the way we intend its use. It's also a approach that looks at students as partners. So we work with students, not necessarily talk to them or at them. So we use the term counselors and counseling as that inclusive terminology that includes advising, but also spans beyond what has been traditionally prescriptive and informational. When we talk about the empowering holistic counseling model that we employ, there are certain principles that inform it. Again, this idea of holistic and comprehensive, understanding the students' needs and identities go beyond the academic identity. So there are many things that we need to consider in that. Grounded in being equity driven and responsive. That means, really seeing our work located in higher education, but part of a bigger contribution towards overall social justice and general societal good and equity. Also looking at students from a strengths-based and student-centered perspective. I think Mo spoke beautifully about this earlier when she was talking about really centering that students aren't all the same, and that we need to center their identities, their voices, and their needs. And so that certainly is something that the empowering holistic model takes, that centers and values. And then finally, I mentioned kind of the concept of counseling as being a partnership and being proactive, being action oriented and transformative. We want to empower students. We want students to learn to advocate for themselves, to be based on action, not simply follow a prescriptive set of points or kind of following a checklist in their college experience. I also want to go over, and this is something that we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on in detail because of the limited time we have here today. But I think one of the things that's developed over time is us being really attuned to what is the scholarship and research out there. Fabrizio and I have actually invested a lot of our time in the last few years in researching our own areas, and you'll hear a little bit about that a little bit later. But what's out there? What are the things that are framing, supporting, grounding, and helping us understand what it is that we actually do and practice every day? So what you see in front of you here are a listing of the core theories and frameworks that inform this concept of empowering holistic counseling, including the developmental academic counseling model, transition theory, community cultural wealth, cultural mismatch theory, a multi-contextual model for diverse learning environments, and social justice framework. I'm going to go through each briefly. I know folks who are here, if you want to learn a little bit more or spend some more time with it, I know we'll make the slide deck available. I know with our limited time here, I'm not able to do justice to each of these frameworks. So let me just try to highlight kind of the points of these and lift from them what really are the key contributions to our overall approach. I think we start with the developmental academic counseling model. This is one of the earlier kind of frameworks around advising and student support. But one of the things that it really did and kind of broke away from traditional historic kind of prescriptive advising is, again, talking about the student support practitioner as a facilitator and as a partner. I think one of the key insights of this model is that it doesn't make assumptions about where students are. So typically and traditionally, you have a student that arrives, they're going to want to graduate, they have these goals for career, and everything falls in line. One of the things that this model contributes is to say, let's not start with that as an assumption. Let's actually unpack what are the interests, the goals, the values that students bring to their process, and let's work with them to help shape their academic career and trajectory based on those things. Similarly, transition theory also regards students' experience in a little different way. Again, not a kind of prescriptive station to station type approach. The key takeaway from transition theory is thinking about the college journey as a set of transitions that are anticipated, unanticipated, and some things that aren't even on the radar of students. This particular model is very important when we talk about, Fabrizio showed earlier, a high percentage of first generation college students. So this idea of transition theory and what folks are moving through, the knowns and unknowns, a lot of our work is with students is really helping them discover and uncover, to make the unanticipated anticipated, to make the unknown known. So transition theory really grounds us in our work, particularly for first generation college students and their experiences. We talked earlier about really starting from a place of student strength, and community cultural wealth allows us to do that, but also give value and recognize and acknowledge everything that students bring with them that's rooted in their backgrounds, in their communities, from their heritage, their ethnicities, and their race. Really saying that those things aren't points of othering, those are points of strength, and having us in our practice reflect those, acknowledge those, and those driving things like engagement, driving things like sense of community when we want students to do well at the university. Related to community cultural wealth is what happens when we don't acknowledge community cultural wealth. What happens when a student is not engaged and they are maybe, again, represent these communities that have traditionally been othered or excluded from higher education in the United States? Then you may have a cultural mismatch. So, and cultural mismatch can be really damaging to students. It can make students feel like there's something wrong with them, or they don't belong, or they don't fit. And really, it's a clash of values. The traditional institutional values that American universities place on things like merit or performance or notions of where value and success lie, that may clash with what students who represent communities that are first-gen, low-income, historically underrepresented bring, where values and perspectives on success, on engagement and belonging may look a little different. For us to understand this, to try to avoid it, is central in our work directly with students. Another thing that's really important is thinking about, another way when we talk about not simply seeing the experience of students as academic, we have to place that experience in a much larger context. So the multi-contextual model for diverse learning environments does exactly that. Essentially, that all the forces that are happening in life are going to be happening in your college experience. And so learning and the ability to have success in college will be impacted by that. So when you talk about comprehensive and holistic, for our practitioners to have a sense that we have to consider all the context. For example, right now in our country, the types of services and approaches we're discussing here really being under attack by our administrative leadership is one of those contexts. We're operating within that environment right now. And then finally, rooting, I said this earlier, rooting our work, not just as higher ed work, but thinking about it as a contribution to greater societal equity and good. So I think that's one of the things that the social justice framework allows us to do. But it also recognizes that all those inequities, all those feelings of exclusion, the things that operate at the societal level, classism and racism and all the other inequities that are experienced by so many of our students, also are at play and at work in the higher education experience. So again, understanding that we cannot compartmentalize students' identity as solely an academic one. And finally, the way we wrap this all together, I talked about the multi-contextual model. Really borrowing from that, we've arrived at this model to really capture the complexity of all these things. We just last week had an in-depth training with a lot of our counselors, and we constantly talk about this work is nuanced, this work is complex, and to understand it and situate it and to zoom out, sometimes it's useful to look at a framework like this, where we can see the dynamics that are at play impacting our students. We can locate where we have the opportunity. The reason this particular conceptual framework has so many arrows and arrows that go both ways is because we know that we can address some of these things and lift students from maybe a place of disengagement, maybe a place of feeling other, maybe a place of feeling things like imposter phenomenon that was named earlier, but we can lift them with the right type of support, with the right type of engagement to success, to feeling like they're more fulfilled and really owning their identity and their place and voice at the university, which was also referenced earlier.
So I'll jump in. I know we're getting close to the end, so I'll zoom through this. So another model, Kimberly Crenshaw's look at intersectionality. No student is just one thing, and you don't always know what's in front of you in terms of identities that are at play. So it's just a reminder to be aware of the signals that you're getting. Sometimes the students will self-disclose some of these identities, sometimes they won't. How do you as a professional self-disclose that you are an ally to many of those communities? So in some cases, it may be the things you have in your office or in your background that signal to students that it's okay for them to bring all of who they are in the intersectional ways that could show up. These are some examples of some of the programs that report to Julian that employ these models of empowering holistic counseling and what I'm going to talk about next, which is equity-based counseling. So part of my study looked at how do you, what I call equity-based counselors, folks in the work, and in particular, folks in many of the programs that Julian oversees and that I've overseen over the years. This question of how do as professionals, how do we prepare ourselves and continue to be up to date on the kinds of things that we need in our practices? So 5 things came out of my research. One, you see the relational the work is relational at the core, it's relational before it's procedural. So before you move to answer the procedural questions, you really have to build a sense of trust as your foundation. The human connection, the students have to believe that you care about them before they tell you really what's going on with them, so that the more you know, the more it helps you help them problem solve and give them options and roads to the outcome that they're trying to get. The next theme that I'll talk about, Julian talked about this a little bit, but it's this notion that the student is not the deficit, the system is the deficit. The student comes with strengths that you have to help them stay connected to or be reminded of. So community cultural wealth and how we use validation theory in the ways that we do our practice, the disruption of deficit narratives. This comes usually when you hear things, you hear deficit framing of the student or negative self-talk that they exhibit through what they're telling you. Our job is to make sure that we're clarifying the students and giving them different examples of language that they could use, and just making it known that, hey, when you said that, did you realize X, Y, and Z? What if you said it this way? Oh, you give them different ways to think about it as strengths-based, which is 2.3, the different ways in which you model that so that it's not robotic in nature, but more natural as a professional. And I'll jump to theme 4, which is that this is partly that as an equity-based counselor, you have to understand that you are always a work in progress as well. You can be both a masterpiece and a work in progress. And that takes you knowing what's going on with you in your life, because what happens as a counselor is if you're not aware of yourself and what's going on with you, you put it on other people and unconsciously, unintentionally. So this is making sure that we're doing that we're learning from students as much as we're giving them, and that as peers, as colleagues, that we're creating ecosystems and opportunities to learn from each other. Next one.
So we spent a lot of time talking about kind of the conceptual underpinnings and undergirding of our work. We've talked about the theoretical frameworks and approaches. I want to move to a little bit more of the practical, right? So I think one of the things I think that makes our support impactful is the combination of the mix of both. And I think that's something that both Fabrizio and I found in our research, kind of an affirmation of that. Here you see just a quick visual on some of the presenting issues. This is kind of in the wheelhouse of the kinds of things our programs and our practitioners address. I'll go a little bit more in depth in this as well. So I've kind of broken them down into 6 major categories. Here you see the first 3. So in employing and really thinking about those approaches and frameworks, and really also utilizing basic counseling techniques, things like mirroring and active listening and summarizing and normalizing. These are the tangible areas that our practitioners also offer to students across our programs. One is really establishing spaces and programming that are identity affirming and cultivate connection among students. So this idea of community and sense of belonging, how do you validate that community cultural wealth and use it as a point of strength and engagement for students, and engagement in some of the practical and more informational resources that they might need. An example of the informational is financial aid guidance and support. So we have so many low-income students that are engaged with our programs. The need for us to serve as translators on what does different type of aid, what's the difference between a scholarship and work study or a loan, particularly among communities where the annual budget for UC Berkeley might be twice as much as their family's total annual household earnings. So unpacking that, dealing with the idea of managing expenses as money and at this scale for the first time. And many of our programs also provide direct support to students, actual additional scholarships or some kind of supplemental financial support. Again, the Bay Area is one of the most expensive places to live in the entire world. And so that becomes even more of a critical resource for our students as well. Another example of more practical, I talked about earlier, advising being situated as a part of a larger counseling approach. Well, advising does happen in our spaces. So providing academic guidance and advising, but to do so in consideration of the unique responsibilities and contexts that our students bring. It's very different to help a student plan for graduation and academic success when they're a student parent that's a little bit older, that have kids and this a necessity to work, than say a traditional 18-year-old coming from high school, right? So taking those responsibilities and contexts in consideration as we do the practical advising and academic guidance. Another set of some of these areas of practice include emotional support and holistic well-being. We understand that the college experience is an emotional one, and it lands and it is experienced differently by marginalized communities that we serve. So that has a different emotional response. We actually have a couple of programs where we have embedded in those programs as part of their service model, licensed psychologists to deal with. So this is particularly important for communities of students who've been in foster care, for our undocumented students. This is where we're recognizing the need to address the emotional experience, but also the mental health needs of our students in a very direct way. And other students are also have those type of services available to them. When we talk about holistic well-being, things even as essential as basic needs, so making sure students have access to food, making sure that housing situations are stable, all those things that come with what are just essential, what we would probably consider just a basic human right. So having access programs and resources in place, again, in a really high cost region of the world, the Bay Area, is even more critically important. We're also helping students plan for the next step. So one of the things that's, again, very tangible and specific is preparing for graduate school, getting competitive and ready for careers, and along the way, developing leadership skills by putting students and really helping see themselves as leaders, but putting them in opportunities where they're going to showcase that leadership, because that itself can make them more competitive or ready for careers in graduate school. And then finally, normalizing that there's going to very likely be bumps in the road, and that there is always understanding, resources, and specialized support that is designed and ready to help address those. So from the start, we talk about the programs we have in place. When students face academic difficulty, when students face personal crisis, normalizing that, again, life happens, and that's going to be part of the college journey as well. As we move to close, I do want to share a little bit on kind of what the impact on students. So you have a testimonial from one of our students, and you can hear directly from them.
I feel like that's what CE3 and USP have to offer. They understand things emotionally. Maybe I'm getting help from my undergraduate major advisor, and they may be exposed to, some of my struggles, but they don't have advice as to what or how I can fix them, or what I can do to find solutions for those. I feel like that's where the USP or CE3 services are needed, because they can understand at the emotional level and they can give you answers.
Here's a student who participated in another one of our programs.
NavCal is more than just a program. It's my family. This community has helped me find my voice, giving me the confidence to share my story while supporting me through every step of my journey. NavCal taught me how to navigate Berkeley, which can often feel big and intimidating. I've learned to fully fund my education, craft strong personal statements, and prioritize my mental health, including starting therapy. Above all, this program has shown me every resource available at UC Berkeley, not just to survive, but to thrive.
When we talk about impact, one of the things that we've learned is you simply cannot look at traditional
Maybe one more minute, Julian, yeah?
Thank you. You simply cannot look at traditional academic measures. We need to look beyond that. And this is a place that we continue to do work and we continue to build, but just to give you a sense of impact in other ways, across our programs, 50% of eligible new students who arrive at Berkeley report that they rely on our services and the support provided by our programs. Of those across programs as well, 90% of participants report being helped or helped very much by that support. And then finally, are the communities that we target and support, again, are some of the most marginalized at our university. And so they typically report lower levels of sense of belonging. When you participate in our programs, we have found that positive sense of belonging has gone up. I'm going to just skip to the last two slides here in the interest of time. So just some recommendations for practice, invest in holistic support programs that integrate many of the aspects that we talked about. Again, involve students. You've heard that as a theme here today. ensure programs are flexible and accessible, and expand the ways we think about success. And then Fab, if you can give us the final last word.
Yeah, just for another invitation to look at how you audit your equity-based or holistic practices, and the reminder that the student support is not just what you're giving, a one-way thing. It's a two-way relationship, and just an invitation to that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Fabrizio and Julian. So, yeah, wonderful presentation. Very interested in all of those aspects. I think, obviously, the theoretical aspect which grounds your work is particularly interesting, I think. And while I wait for some questions to come in, please, if you're out there, don't be shy. You can ask a question in the Q&A. It's fine. Nothing will go badly wrong if you ask a question. There'll be no come back. Nobody will bite your hand off. If you're listening out there, I'm sure you've got thoughts. We're all thinkers in this space. Feel free to make your contribution to this. Don't be intimidated. Ask a question. It's a nice thing. So before we get to that point, though, I'm kind of interested in, for all the panelists, you spoke, Martin, about examples of practice in your space. And Fabrizio and Julian, you spoke particularly about practice, but also about, again, the theoretical model, which I thought the grounding of your work. How do you ensure that in your respective contexts, that across either your institution or across, in your case, Martin, a number of institutions, that the practice is spread, or the ideas are spread? How do you spread those ideas? How do you ensure that more people understand good practice? Or in your case, Fabrizio and Julian, how do you understand people in the theoretical base? How do people understand that theory? Did they go through training? Did they go through capacity building? What happens? Martin, maybe you go first.
Well, I'm just reflecting when you're saying that, Graham, that we held our conference this year at the University of Salford, and I think it comes from leadership. I think it comes from a real commitment from senior managers around access and community, and we were very lucky to have a Vice-Chancellor who, normally what happens is the Vice-Chancellor comes along and welcomes all the delegates to the conference. This Vice-Chancellor did that, then took part in a panel discussion, then came to every keynote address that was held, attended the conference dinner, and also came back and shared a panel discussion the next day. And it became very clear that under his leadership, community, making a difference to the local community, is absolutely a key aspect to that particular university's mission and drive. And I think it goes back to something that Mo mentioned, that strategic leadership is absolutely key in that space, and that buy-in. And when you've got that from the very top, other people tend to come on board, should we say.
Thank you, Martin. Julian, Fabrizio.
Yeah, I think, we just actually did a reference this in the presentation of training last week, where the goal of that training was just to locate this is vast, complex, and nuanced. This is not easy work. And the reality is that, and Fabrizio talked about this as one of the things that he found in his research, this is a lifelong commitment as well, that practitioners spend years honing and getting really well at it. And that's okay. I think what we try to do is just the same thing we do with students, do a strengths-based approach. So usually the starting place is familiarity with the experience. There's a question in the chat about kind of what our staff looks like. 63% of our staff actually are alumni of UC Berkeley and probably have participated in the same program they are now working in. So starting, is the familiarity your pace of strength that we're building from and adding and teaching these models? Is it some of the more practical things? Are you an expert in financial aid? Have you come from an advising background, which again is part of the larger context of our work? And so building off of that and saying, let's get on the same page on what holistic and comprehensive means, and let's work towards that. These overviews are one way to establish that standard and definition, but then we have to do the work for each area to provide more specialized training, or at least connect our practitioners with that training in order to make sure that they can practice it.
And I would add part of what we noticed over the last decade plus was that even though particular counselors were doing their work in particular ways that were effective, we couldn't tell you why that was. And and they were using many of these theories and frameworks, but they couldn't tell you that they were using those theories and frameworks. So grounding them and say, hey, what you're doing appears like this, or here's the way I see the work, and giving them the language of what currently exists, and then moving beyond that. So what you're seeing now is our staff and our leaders are publishing studies, are publishing articles, are beginning to articulate their work as something that should be looked at. And so that what was discussed earlier about how you tell the story of what you do and the impact via data, via presentations, via research. It's so critical to what we're building at Berkeley and under Dr. Ledesma's leadership.
Thank you. Another question that's come up in the chat now as the questions are coming in is this interesting question here from Anne-Marie. How important is locality and student sense of belonging in your work? Martin, what do you think?
Here in the UK, locality makes a big difference and can actually dictate whether or not you go to university. It's a big indicator. So if you live in London, there's a high density of universities around London. You're far more likely to go to university than if you actually live in the northeast of England, which there are far less. And that question on sense of belonging, I think that goes, we know particularly once students get to higher education, that sense of belonging is crucial. And it's often when you don't have that, that's a reason why it becomes very easy to drop out. Here in the UK, we have a lot of students who, the traditional model of higher education in the UK is you go away for 3 years, you live in halls, you live on a campus. Now there's a lot more students who don't do that. They stay at home to study. They travel into the university, they go to their lectures, they come away, and there isn't that chance for them to build that same sense of community within the institution that they study at. And therefore, if they hit a barrier, say they've got caring responsibilities, or if they need to work, it kind of moves down the list of priorities and they're more likely to give up their studies. So yeah, I just think it's really important.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and add on that a little bit, because for UC Berkeley in particular, we're really pulling from and part of the mission is to provide access to students in California or from California, and California obviously is vast. But I think one of the things that I wanted to add to what Martin was sharing was the concept of sense of belonging starts prior to arriving at the university. There are already concepts and notions about do I belong or not belong, given a student's perspective on that particular university, on the college experience. One of the things that's a challenge for us is really fighting the undermatching dynamic as well. So students who are admitted to Berkeley are brilliant. They're top students anywhere. But sometimes, again, with those a feeling of not belonging, a feeling of othering, a feeling of the university, do I really belong there from an academic self-concept perspective? Sometimes students will pick other choices that aren't as impactful or have kind of the merit or the prestige of Berkeley. And that dynamic, by the way, carries out in it. We see it in career approach and career readiness and kind of the ways that many of our students will approach career for the same reason. So for us, this is why it's so important to reflect culture, diversity, heritage, to affirm those things just in our practice, in our work, how we're set up, what we do. And then at the point where students are making decisions to come to the university, show that front and center. We've talked more and more in the last couple of years about early engagement, not waiting till they show up. We don't do outreach, but to make sure we're present, to folks know if you choose to come to Berkeley, you have this robust ecosystem of support where you're certainly going to be understood, you're certainly going to feel like you belong, but you're also going to get really tangible support along the way.
And I would add is also front loading. Some students, some of you may feel X, Y, and Z. Some of you may experience X, Y, and Z. Here's some advice about that and how to navigate that. Here are the resources, to Julian's point, that are going to be here to support you, so that we're not waiting for the crisis to happen in our office, but we're getting them thinking throughout their decision-making process about whether to choose a university like Berkeley.
Thank you. Thank you, Fabrizio, Julian, and Martin. So I guess we've probably, I looked at the Q&A, but I guess probably one final question I could pose to you as a group. Yeah, I mean, we know that the needs and challenges that students face are ever evolving and ever changing. So maybe a crystal ball moment for you all now. What do you see as the big challenges, maybe new or existing challenges, facing students from low income, marginalised, underserved populations over the next 5 years in your different countries? Martin.
I think the biggest challenge is cost of living, and the sector having an understanding in the UK that even full-time students are holding down a job, and that gone are the days where actually students from the majority of backgrounds can devote 100% of their time to their academic studies. So that from all the research that's happened, the reports that have come out in the last couple of years, the cost of living crisis, I think is having the biggest impact on current students and their decision where to go in the first place.
Julian, Fabrizio.
I mean, I would agree. I think affordability, again, I've mentioned several times how the Bay Area is one of the most expensive cost of living regions in the entire world. And I also think about, we could have a whole nother segment of our presentation that's how do we fund what we do, and on 40%, at least for the programs that were highlighted, only 40% of the funding for those programs actually comes from the university. So sustainability of programs, and then the larger context is, what will be the impact of the current leadership of our country, and there's a lot of different ways where that's threatened. We're actually waiting on. The last couple of days, there was news about California public education funds being withheld. You're talking about nearly $1 billion. So those threats are real. But I just worry about the impact on students in terms of kind of from a propaganda perspective. When I was a student at Berkeley, was an affirmative action admin. So if you know affirmative action, it considered race as one factor in the overall admissions process. That hasn't existed for 30 years, but yet we still see the remnants of how some of our own students think about or perceive affirmative action. And that is because the campaign on demonizing affirmative action was so successful. So I worry about the current propaganda and the how that's going to impact students. Are they going to not engage in our services because they feel it's some kind of inappropriate, a demonized thing? So those are some of the things. There's a lot to worry about right now. I think when it comes to public education, it comes to equity in our country right now, but I also think of the impact on the students we're actually trying to serve.
And I'll just quickly add that I agree, divestment from higher education is a major issue. It's not a recent issue. It's been a 20-year plus divestment, at least in California. And I think the second thing tied to that is this case for higher education. Is it still relevant? Does it matter? And why? That I think to the masses, I think we have to tell the story of why it's important to a thriving society, to social mobility. I think we have to tell all those stories and make sure that it matters to people.
Thank you, Fabrizio. Excellent place to finish our work today. We'll just, I think, again, I'd like to thank Martin, Fabrizio and Julian for their presentations this afternoon, and also for engaging in debate and discussion. I'm sure where you are around the world, you'll be thanking them in your own way. So thank you very much, gentlemen. Okay, so we'll draw ourselves to a conclusion in a few moments. Just a few points to note with regards to future WAHEN events coming up. So we are launching a new piece of research work with the support of the Lumina Foundation from the US, mapping global higher education participation by social background, looking where data exists. Very much to the point that Fab made at the end there. We are in an environment now across the world where we need to have the evidence for the progress, or not the progress we're making when it comes to equity and access. But we're trying to bring together a global report that brings together the evidence we have across the world when it comes to who participates and who succeeds in higher education. There's a survey there. We encourage you to complete it. All it asks you to do is signpost us to where data may exist in your own country. If you have knowledge of data that looks at who participates in higher education by social background and it's collected by your government at national level or regional level, or by an agency related to the state, If you have knowledge of that, you can signpost us to that. It'd be great to fill in, be part of that report as well. And also to identify any challenges when it comes to assembling data. We also have, I think, World Access to Education Day. I mentioned at the beginning there, for those of you who aren't aware, we had 5 editions of WAHEN from 2018 to 2022. Under WAHEN, the idea is that we provide a framework, a badge within which you can deliver activities related to equity, access and success in your own environments, be that your own university, your own organisation, your own area. We're keen to have as many organisations, as many activities as possible happening on WAHEN. It is crucial, as Fab said at the end, that we bring together advocacy for our work. When we have events like this, we hear some amazing practice across the world. And those of us on the call will know that we invested to some degree in that kind of practice in our own institutions and organisations. However, it is crucial we advocate for that work to our institutions, to our policymakers, and to the wider society. WAHEN is part of that effort. As well as advocacy, it's about celebrating, bringing our work together, and promoting innovation. If you have things you want to do on WAHEN, please fill in the form. It will be a WAHEN event. It'll add value, we hope, to what you're doing there and to the efforts globally to address inequalities and access and success across the world. Finally, to close, I think you've seen evidence today that across 4 continents of the world, there are great examples of innovation in practice happening when it comes to supporting those from different backgrounds to enter and succeed in higher education. And we need to spread that activities. We heard at the beginning around work going on in Chile there at institutional level. We heard, of course, of Mo and June, of the work they've done in the South African context, challenging to the institutional buy-in to that. We heard Martin there bringing in several examples of work across the UK. And then Fabrizio, Julian talking again about the idea of theory and knowledge and evidence driving the work across multiple interventions and multiple areas of work in Berkeley. It shows there has to be a long-term commitment to this activity for success. But it shows that even if you're at the beginning of your journey in your organisation when it comes to developing these initiatives, there are things to look at, to take signs, lessons from, and connect with across the world. We're promoting and developing a global community here in WAHEN. We'd like to be part of that, serving the students we know need the most in our higher education systems. Thank you for being part of our event today. Future events will be coming up into the autumn. Please, again, if you wish to learn more about WAHEN, become engaged in our work, do reach out to us through WAHEN or for our monthly bulletin or directly. Thank you again to our presenters. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.